All right, man. So we had reports of explosions in Iran, and then we had those OSINT guys saying there was a stratotanker flying from the UAE. Initial reports were that the UAE was attacking Iran. Then we had reports from Iranian sources that Mehr News, Middle East Spectator, which is not an Iranian source, MEA, I don't know what that's called, Middle East something, Middle East Eye, reporting that the UAE was attacking Iran. Mehr News reported the same thing, and then we had missiles fly out of Iran towards the Strait of Hormuz, and then we got a report that came in just a few minutes ago. According to Fox News, the U.S. attacked the ports, the Keshem, the one on the Keshem. You know which ones, I'm sure. I'll read them out in a second. I'll find the report, and that was a retaliation for the attack against the UAE 2 days ago. That was what the attack by the U.S. was about, and now there's alerts. So U.S. forces carried out strikes a short time ago on Keshem Island and Bandar Abbas, which you always talk about. So these are the two targets by the U.S. And that was in response to the strike on Fujairah. And now there's alerts in the UAE as well. So Iran is probably retaliating against the UAE. Now, what Iran just said is that they are responding to, so let me see what they are claiming. So they've accused the U.S. of violating a ceasefire because the U.S., it all started with the U.S. attacking a cargo ship as well, a vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. So that was what started there. So they were attacking an Iranian oil tanker Need Jasik and another vessel off the coast of Fujairah. These are Iranian, that's the U.S. attacking them, while simultaneously conducting airstrikes on non-military areas in Bandar Kamir, Sirik, and Keshem Island in coordination with some regional countries. Interesting. So it seems, according to them, it's coordination with regional countries. So I'm not sure whether they're implying this is the Americans and the Emiratis are attacking Iran. In response, Iranian armed forces struck U.S. military vessels east of the Strait of Hormuz and south of Shabar port, inflicting significant damage. So yeah, there we are.
All right. Look, I've been watching a lot of the video that's been coming out. I've been watching the report since you put that out about an hour ago. And I think there's a lot of, how can I put it, media confusion about what's happening in the battle space right now. I can tell you two things that are accurate, and then one, we will have to wait and see what the United States actually claims that they're doing. But based on that report out of Central Command, I can pretty much explain what they're doing. First off, I find the statement that this was done, that it was the Emirates attacking, I'm not sure if that's true. Based on what I've seen, that the activity over Bandar Abbas proper is most likely going to be an Emirati reconnaissance drones. If Emirati, it might be American reconnaissance drones that are that were flown over there to carry out reconnaissance against the small boats that we've been seeing. 2 days ago, the Iranians had, through satellite imagery, we saw no less than 88 what we call FIAC, FIACs, right? Fast inshore attack craft. That's what we call these little, these little boats that you see back there that carry 2 to 3 guys, heavy machine gun, right? Dushka machine gun, or some other kind of armaments, 23 millimeter gun, PKM machine gun. It doesn't matter. These are small, high-speed boats, right? I have fought these high-speed boats. I've chased these high-speed boats back when bog hammers were the big thing in the 1980s. They're hard to catch. They're very hard to catch because they move 40, sometimes 50 knots. That's very fast for ships, right? U.S. warships top out at 30 to 35 knots, okay? So we use helicopters and aircraft to do that. That somebody at this point in the story, okay, would carry out a retaliation attack for something that occurred 2 days ago, as Donald Trump is right now supposedly in the throes of getting, or at least getting, a memorandum of understanding with Iran that would shut the war down for 30 days, seems a little improbable to me, unless it was the United States working, as they said, with their regional allies in order to flex their muscles. We learned just yesterday that Project Freedom, which was the U.S. Freedom of Navigation Operation. That's what that really stands for. Which came in, brought in 2 ships, the USS Mason, USS Truxtun, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and helped guide out 2 container ships or merchant ships that were U.S. flagged, that were part of the U.S. Defense Cooperation Agreement, where the U.S. pays these merchantmen to fly U.S. flags. And those ships got out. The attack that happened on Fujairah and the 12 ballistic missiles which were fired on Dubai, right, was Iran's way of saying, stop playing in this game. The question is, has there been an escalation? Is the Emirates operating separately, or is this in cooperation with the United States? We know the United States is flying A-10 Warthogs out of Dhafra to go and hunt these small boats. We know that they're flying AH-64 Apache longbows, and U.S. Marine Corps F-18s out of another base, Dhafra mainly, and another site that were supposed to be conducting patrols around here. But if they've struck, right, Qasem Island and the vicinity of Bandar Abbas, the video that you saw that's about 10 seconds long in Bandar Abbas is clearly Iranian surface-to-air missile fire going out into the Gulf, right? It's too short for anything else. That would be in response to the drones that were there. We always put a drone out first, okay? And then there could be any kind of drone. Could be a Pioneer drone, could be an RQ-5, could be any kind of small drone, could be an Emirati Miley drone. And they shot it down. That's what drones are there to be for. But if the United States is acknowledging that they struck Qasem Island, that's because those FIACs, right, those fast inshore attack boats, are really pissing them off. They have been exercising almost near impunity since the beginning of this war. Remember, in the first 13 days of the war, the United States didn't get around to like 2 weeks into the war to attacking the Iranian Navy. And they sank the big stuff. All the ships that were at sea, the ships that were at port, they were all anchored. There were no sailors on those ships other than the one ship that was sunk southwest of Sri Lanka, right? The destroyer, which was sunk southwest of Sri Lanka. So the Iranian Navy manpower is intact. The ships were sunk, 153 craft. And I have been saying, even on this show, many times, up until 2 days ago, the United States had not sunk one fast attack boat in the Strait of Hormuz this entire war, because they're like the Eye of Sauron. Their attention has been focused on blasting the 10,000 big targets that they have. So that being said, the frustration that must be building in the White House with these small boats, where they sank 7 a couple of days ago, or 7 boats. Nothing says that they all could have been or all were Iranian high-speed fast attack craft. We're good at that, though, right? When we use our Seahawk helicopters with Hellfire missiles, we have a sensor where we can look into that boat. We can count how many guys are in there. We can see if they have rifles on them. You know, but we have made mistakes. So let's assume that there actually were 7 Iranian attack craft that were struck. Then those 7 were struck in that operation where they were trying to clear the pathway for the U.S. tankers and ships. Today, striking Qasem Island tells you that they were striking the ports or the beaches that these small craft pulled up in. Like I said, the other day, we have visual confirmation of 88 of those craft were out in the Strait of Hormuz, right? We have satellite confirmation of them operating in squadrons of 10 to 20 small boats. This is the way that we have always seen them operate. This is the way that we know that they do operate. And apparently, someone in the White House made the decision that they want those small boats suppressed. The problem is, by doing so, you violate the ceasefire, or we go into another phase of the ceasefire. So, that being said, we really need to be careful about what's happening here. I know that there's reports of anti-aircraft fire west of Tehran. Yes, there's anti-aircraft fire west of Tehran because it's quite possible drones are operating over there. Could be Israeli, could be the United States, could be Turkey. You never know. But those drones operating there, or what we call TALD, T-A-L-D, tactical air launch decoys, could be there to now suss out the installations that we saw being moved over the last 2 weeks during the ceasefire. I just don't understand the logic of poking that bear at this point when the White House is expecting an agreement. Because every time they do this,
Iran
they
rejected the agreement a couple of hours ago. I'm not sure if you saw.
as we say in Arabic, right? Halas, hada warda, right? That's rose, that's rose water.
So Reuters
That's
is
just
saying that right now, by the way, reports that Iran is still actively targeting U.S. Navy vessels in the Persian Gulf. According to publicly available maritime data, there are multiple U.S. warships within Emirati territorial waters.
correct. There are. Well, two of them, one on the east side, one on the west side. And what we're doing is we're creating an air defense bubble to the north, right? So, I mean, one is probably in the waters near Al Quwain. Definitely. That's where I would have you, right? That allows you to cover what we call the SOEPA, right? The Southwest Strait of Hormuz patrol area. And then you have the eastern one, right? SOHIPA, Strait of Hormuz Eastern Patrol Area, just north of Dibba. And that allows you, or even closer, as they come in, that allows you to have an air defense umbrella. The point is, when the Iranians shoot at something in the Strait of Hormuz, that doesn't necessarily mean they're shooting at a U.S. warship. That requires ESM, right? Electronics countermeasures. It requires either very strong surface search radars to track the U.S. warship. We go into emissions control, or we use our Spy 1 radars on the U.S. warships. That's detectable by
There's still
Iranian
massive
intelligence.
explosions. Why is there still explosions still now in Bandar Abbas? How significant is Bandar Abbas, and why would that be targeted?
Bandar Abbas is extremely significant because it is the center of Iranian naval power. It's also where some of these tunnels, command posts, and the small boats just pull up on the beaches out there. Remember, many of these boats don't have to be gray with Iranian Navy markings. These boats just need to have propellers and be able to carry armed men out into the water. The explosions near Bandar Abbas, we're going to find out, are just surface to air response to there. Now, if the Americans struck there with some small drones, their own Lucas drones, which is the U.S.-made Shahed, very slow, low-powered, low-cost drone, that's one thing. It just brings the one question. Remember, this is politics that is being done at the end of a gun. What is the political objective of this? To prod the Iranians into an agreement, to smack them on the wrist for having an agreement? Why would you do that and risk a broader war? We know the Saudis don't want this mission done. They killed, according to NBC
They
News.
reopened, but they did kill the Operation Freedom. They reopened them, and the Kuwaitis reopened their airspace right after Iran rejected the deal. So within less than an hour, we got reports that Saudi and Kuwait have lifted the ban on the U.S. using the airspace.
Sure, and I'm almost certain that's because the United States assured them that they would not use Saudi and Kuwaiti airspace for the attacks down there. This is almost an Emirates-focused mission. They just don't want this to be dragged into a broader war. And the Saudis need resupply. We need resupply. We need to cross and transit over there to Qatar and places like that. So that's a reasonable decision. But not everything means that they are siding with every decision the United States makes, even though the Saudis are pretty militant about this. The Emirates are the one who feel like they've been slighted the most. Our problem is that this can become a Robert Pape, Professor Robert Pape, as you've had him on, escalation ladder.
Yeah.
And we thought we had taken the ladder down until today. I thought even the attacks that we had 2 days ago were still low grade, and the United States thinking they could get away with this or that. But by conducting an operation, this just doesn't make sense, and we're going to need more information as to why they did that. And if they did it just to get the high-speed boats, that tells you not Pete Hegseth, not General Kane, not Admiral Cooper, that Donald Trump himself is very frustrated by the presence and existence of these craft. I hope someone explains to him that they have 32,000 more of them all up and down the Arabian Gulf, and that they can bring down more boats or bring them out of storage faster than we can try to kill each and every one of these tiny little boats.
There's still reports. I'm just getting them now. Why is it ongoing? I thought they've struck it. If it's a limited strike.
Well, you have to also understand that Iranian air defense is going to be spooked for a very long time after this, right? Also, we're flying drones. Post-strike reconnaissance, we fly a drone. During the strike, we fly a drone. After the strike, we fly a drone to find out just exactly what's going on. How is Iran moving? Where are these little tiny air defense guns? Now, I have to tell you something. This entire war, I saw almost zero video of Iranian AAA, right? Anti-aircraft gun artillery. Saw some surface-to-air missile action, but I was really surprised that they weren't putting up giant air defense screens like Baghdad at the beginning of Desert Storm, right? Well, apparently that's changed. Also, now we're seeing people who have phones and Wi-Fi actually put out the internet. And there are a lot of people on Qasem Island, right? There's 54 villages on that island. It's not barren at all. So Iranian air defense is going to be spooked for a while, and we could be doing things to spook them. We could be launching these tactical air launch decoys that will go towards their air defense, and let them fire at them so that they now reveal these positions. Because during the ceasefire, the Iranians have been moving weapons, guns, cruise missiles, boats, everything around where U.S. intelligence can see them. And now we have to deal with a new reality of what's happened now towards the end of this ceasefire.
Yeah, so the explosions, the reports of explosions in the UAE, there are no explosions. It seems to be targeting American warships that are loitering in Emirati waters. Mm. So there's another one here saying it's
that's possible.
Would you expect them to respond? So first, Iran is saying that with the involvement of another Gulf country, is it possible that Emiratis were involved in these strikes on Iran? That would be a stupid decision if Emiratis sent fighter jets with the Americans. Like, the Americans don't need the Emirati support. So what's the point?
No, all they need to do is send up a drone. Do air-to-air coordination can mean that the Emirati air defense system is working with U.S. helicopters and strike aircraft over the Strait of Hormuz to provide air control and deconfliction, right? Deconfliction means...
Channel 14 just said the ceasefire has collapsed. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought you'd want to... The ceasefire has collapsed. Now, that's Israeli media doing
that's
what
Israeli media, right? Yeah, they'd love that.
Yeah.
As far as they're concerned, they would love it.
Is it possible?
Or,
is it possible?
Alternatively, the activity we're seeing near Tehran could be Israeli reconnaissance aircraft and drones. And what we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz is United States and the Emirates as a little pressure point onto the jugular of the Iranians. But at this point, I would call it what we call H&I, right? Harassment and interdiction. It's where you put out sporadic fire just to see how the enemy will respond. So I'm not quite sure what the Hezgethian logic is beyond this, other than doing something cool. Maybe the Emiratis wanted to be involved, but I suspect it's not direct action, right? It could be flying any one of a number of drones for the United States over Bandar Abbas, or just coordinating the airspace as part of the Emirati air defense system.
But the Emiratis, it would be silly for them to be involved directly. It'll just...
Well, that's why I said they could just be coordinating.
Yeah, but would that be enough? So how would Iran respond to this? Could they again take it out on the UAE. So far, they're just targeting the American warships, but could we see attacks maybe later tonight or tomorrow, assuming the ceasefire holds, against the UAE again?
I'm not sure they're actually attacking the American warships. I think they may be attacking ghosts. We have a relatively easy way.
So it just came in. Just came in now as well. All Israeli television stations have been interrupted by an as of yet unknown emergency broadcast due to the ongoing escalations in Iran. Israel's home front command is urging all residents to remain near shelters. Warplanes have been heard over Baghdad and Basra, central and southern Iraq. Iran's state media broadcaster says no civilian casualties.
Did you say airplanes have been heard over Basra?
Yeah.
Oh, here it comes. I tell you what's happening now. The Israelis are throwing a strike. First drones, then transit aircraft, because that's Israel's route coming south of Basra between Bubiyan Island and the city of Basra. I lived in Basra for almost 6 months, a year almost. Yeah, that's their way in. And you got to remember, the Israelis don't actually have to go into Iran to carry out a strike. I'm sure they will. They feel that's their air defense, their airspace, right? But they can actually launch over the Iraqi border these air-launched ballistic missiles. Maybe they think they have Mujtaba al-Khamenei in their sights. Because right now, that's the only two reasons Israel would do something like provocative would be: one, they have an opportunity to kill Mujtaba al-Khamenei. Two, they just don't feel like listening to the United States right now. They're going to do whatever they want to do.
Oh, Israeli outlets are now alleging Israeli involvement in the strikes on the Manab naval base.
Well, how? I mean, other than flying a drone over there, I can't see how Israel would be involved. That's a long.
They might have had fighter jets, or it's just too far for them.
It's a long ass flight. I have seen this during the Iran-Iraq war. Iraqis flying from Ashweba, which is just south of Basra. That's a 2.5-hour flight. Even if you cut over Saudi Arabia, that's a long flight. And why would you let the Israelis do it when we have 2 aircraft carriers sitting there? Because if the Israelis do it, we're getting the blame. If the Israelis fly...
But they're everywhere. It strikes out, and now Bushehr as well. And Manab and Bushehr.
That, I believe, is Israel. I just said this on my podcast this morning, that Israel has, and I've said this to you many times, Israel has a separate agenda in this war. And they're really upset with the fact that they are not at the table, other than Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff representing their interests, and that they could spoil this whole thing. So now if we have activity off of Bushehr, that could be ballistic missiles, that could be ballistic missiles launched off of aircraft, could be cruise missiles. But I really think that Israel now is doing everything in the northern Persian Gulf, and the United States and the Emiratis are doing something in the southern Persian Gulf. And if they view this as a let's just ratchet it up one ratchet, I think Iran's going to take this very poorly. The reason that Israeli television is telling you this is they are confirming.
Confirming.
They're confirming Israel is now over Iran, and that they should expect in 15 minutes ballistic missiles to be launched by Iran. It's the only reason they would make these things are following in the proper sequence for the little things that indicate a massive operation is on.
I couldn't believe this is happening. Is it possible that could Israel be acting unilaterally in all this, or highly unlikely in the midst of negotiations?
Highly unlikely if there's activity going on around Bandar Abbas. Bandar Abbas is way out of Israel's way. I don't care if you launch cruise missiles; it's still way out of the way. And the only thing that's going to happen is if you strike Bandar Abbas or you're hitting Qashem. We've already acknowledged we're hitting Qashem, right? Central Command says that. Halas. Yeah. That's our pressure point on this operation. But Israel is hitting other things by striking. If there's actual activity near Bushehr, could be Karg Island. We saw activity off of Karg Island that was unusual these last few days. An oil leak has come from an underwater pipeline that is now creating a little microeconomic disaster or ecological disaster up there. No one knows how that happened. Bushehr and Karg are just 18 miles apart. Any explosion in either location, you're going to hear noise. So, but the fact that Israeli television is telling people to stay close to shelters tells you that Israel is actually carrying out an operation in Iran. It's just a question of seeing how big it is at this point.
The IRGC Navy Command wrote on X the following. Following the ceasefire violation and the aggression of the U.S. terrorist army against an Iranian oil tanker near Bandar Jask and the approach of the U.S. terrorist army destroyers to the Strait of Hormuz, a very large and precise combined operation was carried out using various ballistic and anti-ship cruise missiles and explosive warhead attack drones fired at the enemy destroyers. Mm-hmm. Intelligence monitoring indicates significant damage to the American enemy, and three invading enemy ships quickly fled the Strait of Hormuz area.
Well, I'm not sure about the damage part. We are very good at shooting down ballistic missiles. That's the one part that's sort of missing from this story, right? People who, unless somebody who lives up in Kasab, Oman, is looking out down over the beach, U.S. surface-to-air missiles intercepting ballistic missiles is going to be a pretty easily seen, spectacular sight. You'll see that from Al Quwain. If you know where the Oman UAE border crossing is up there north of Al Quwain, you can see any activity that's going on in the sky. So I believe the Iranians may have threatened that. They may even have attacked that. But again, we're actually pretty good at creating false images of where our ships are at. It's called spoofing. We have jamming capabilities that will let the Iranians think they're in one place. Also, we have these small drones that can go out there, run a Ferranti radar on it, and make it look like there's a U.S. warship out there in order to seduce or spoof these drones.
How do we try to analyze what's happening now and determine what is it? Is it just a limited response? So it's the US. So it's because there's mixed messages. There's the US responding to the attack on the UAE, and that's what came out of Fox News. Then we have the reports of the US fired on a cargo ship, an Iranian cargo ship, and Iran, as per their statement, they retaliated very heavily. And then we have reports of potential involvement by Israel. That's not confirmed yet. We put all this together. Can both be true simultaneously? What's more likely going on now that you know it, now that we have this information?
All of it can be considered true. Everything that you've said to me here is ear witness, eyewitness. Also, there's a sequence of communications coming out of Israel that clearly show that Israel is carrying out a strike. We've been watching this for the last year and a half. This is how it goes, right? That sequence is normally reserved for when Israeli aircraft are entering Iran territory across the southern Iraqi access way. Also, you can turn south, to the southeast over Bubiyan Island and enter Kuwaiti airspace and head towards Bushehr, or even just launch a cruise missile from there, right? Bandar Abbas is a bit of a stretch. That is clearly U.S. Emirati territory. And the U.S. firing on a tanker is us firing warning shots at a tanker. That's not us attacking a tanker in order to set it on fire. Remember, we're just trying to seize these things. So all of this had to have taken place in coordination with Israel. The United States and Israel are like this. The Emiratis and the Israelis are like this, depending on what the subject is, right? And so I think what you're going to find out is the Emiratis help coordinate this U.S. mission to take out high-speed small boats on Qashem Island. That's all the shooting that we have down there.
Israeli Prime Minister is currently speaking with members of the Security Cabinet over the phone discussing the recent events, according to Israeli media. But that's expected. Would that only happen if Israel was involved, or would happen even if Israel's not involved? And is it possible that Iran is the one escalating again? Like we saw, I want to say escalating, but responding disproportionately in a way that is unexpected. We saw that after the attack 2 days ago, when they attacked Fujairah and attacked the UAE. And then we could be seeing this now where maybe there was a strike by the US and Israel in retaliation, but they're saying that the attacks on US warships is ongoing. By the way, CENTCOM just put out a statement. US forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as US Navy-guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz to the Gulf of Oman.
Now we have both sides of that story. We have the Iranian side, we have the US side. So
I'll give you
what
the
we
rest of the
had is the
statement.
U.S.
Do you want me to
The
give you the?
U.S.
Do you want me to give you the rest of the statement?
Oh
Because they
yeah,
go
I was
through
going
it
to
in there.
predict your future, but go ahead.
Iranian forces launched multiple missiles, drones, and small boats as USS Truxtun, USS Rafael Peralta, Mason, and USS Mason transited the international sea passage. No U.S. assets were struck. CENTCOM eliminated inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces, including missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. CENTCOM does not seek escalation, but remains positioned and ready to protect American forces. Okay.
Okay, now it makes sense. The U.S. ran 3 vessels in there. I knew the Mason and the Truxtun were operating up there, but this is a whole squadron, 3 vessels. Remember how we talked about this a few days ago, that actually weeks ago, we talked about the fact that the United States would start conducting what we call FON operations, freedom of navigation operations. And that's where you force your way through the Strait of Hormuz. I've gone through the Strait of Hormuz at battle stations. Very nerve-wracking, very uneven. Now, this is a different world, right? Drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles could all be out there. So now we ran 3 vessels. Question is, do we run from the east to the west? Most likely. And then as the Iranians saw us, took us under attack using their Project Mosaic, right, which is their decentralized command and control. I'm sure they have a little book that says when U.S. warships enter the Gulf, you will engage with this number of ballistic missiles, this number of drones, this kind of anti-aircraft, put small craft out in the water for patrol. And the U.S. seized that attack. One, we stopped it and used jamming, used surface-to-air missiles, which I have done. I have been attacked and engaged against Iranian surface-to-surface missiles and air-to-surface aircraft and things like that. And now Central Command had ready a strike package for when those vessels went through. And to be quite honest, running those vessels through may have been the reason, because they wanted to strike those locations. Key question: how does Iran take this now? Because maybe Iran initiated these attacks, but the United States struck Iranian land. Do they want to take this up one more step? And to tell you the truth, by doing this, it's another sort of a weird, when Trump chickens out, he always has to do something muscular, right? And we call this, what does Wall Street call it? Nacho, right? Not a chance Hormuz opens. They carry out these activities that really make it so that the market absolutely will go nuts, and oil will go back to $110 a barrel tomorrow morning, down from the low of 90 today, which some people believe is calculated. Starting to get the feeling, because this is the 14th time this has happened, that it may be calculated. But that being said, I understand it, but these are 2 separate things now, which may still be coordinated. The Israelis may be carrying out operations in Iran, which apparently from the air defense videos that I'm seeing up there, something's flying up there enough to make them start shooting in every direction. And now there may be an Israeli strike in on the way. And because of the activity of Bandar Abbas, maybe activity of Bushehr, activity we know is going on west of Tehran, aircraft or missiles being heard south of Basra, and Israeli television saying, stand by to be attacked by Iran, ... then we know that a coordinated operation is going on.
That report, but that TV report, so I forgot to tell you earlier, came out. The statement of the TV report that it prepared for strikes an emergency report, that's not true. It did not happen in Israel. They reported it, but it was debunked.
Okay, we take that
so
away.
there is no that, and there's no seeking shelter yet. But everything else is true about the not true. The reports of a fighter jet over Iraq and the call between Netanyahu and the security cabinet, these are
Still
happening.
legit.
And some media outlets speculating that Israel was part of it, but we don't have any confirmation. So now what is the ball? So you're saying there's a freedom of navigation move by the US, the warships to try to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Yep. Iran saw this because of their decentralized structure. They immediately attacked them. The commanders have a clear guideline. If you see a US warship, fire X number of missiles, and then if this happens, that happens, that happens. So then they fired the missiles, and then the US warships expecting the attack, immediately attacked multiple locations in Iran.
Well,
But that's
Central Command had a package of aircraft and missiles ready because they were waiting for this. And so the warships defending themselves using jamming, surface to air missiles, whatever it is that they're going to use, SM-1, SM-2 surface to air missiles, which are pretty good. Then U.S. Central Command struck the sites and locations that these came from. We do these things also to provoke attacks so that we can find out where the ballistic missiles are, find out where the drones are coming from. We'll have not drones, but cruise missiles are coming from. We'll have drones up there looking for the launch sites now. We can see them from space. So this is the kind of freedom of navigation operation I personally would not like to be on the warships with, because there's a lot of risk involved, including the possibility of striking mines. But if Iran only fired a few missiles and ballistic missiles, then it's relatively
no, it
reserved.
seems significant. No, CBS citing U.S. officials, reports that the 2 U.S. Navy destroyers are currently facing a severe and ongoing Iranian attack. And then here we've got another one report. The IRGC has announced that they carried out a large-scale combined operation using ballistic and cruise anti-ship missiles and explosive drones against U.S. destroyers near the Strait of Hormuz. The action was taken in response to U.S. violation, blah, blah, blah.
Still the
intelligence indicates significant damage was inflicted on U.S. forces, and 3 enemy vessels were quickly fled the area. So you're saying they went through the Strait of Hormuz and across through Emirati waters? Is that how they went?
The southern, what we're calling the Southern Traffic Separation Scheme, where they come in just north of Dibba and they stay very close to the shore. And as they cut through to the north, I think the village is Qasem, and then they cut south towards Qassab, very close to the coast, in order to confuse radars. That's probably where the IRGC got them, because they can pick them up on radar, they can get them on thermal, and command and control can see them, they can detect their radar systems, and then whoop, they start launching things in accordance to a predetermined strike package. That the United States defended against it, no doubt. Based on what CBS News is saying, 2 ships went through, but 3 ships were probably involved. We like to keep 1 on the east and then 1 on the west. And in this case, you're transiting 2 through, and it gives you a full integrated air defense cover. This area we're talking about is not large, okay? It's really small for air defense. When I had my missile battle with the Iranian patrol craft, we were trading missiles at 13 nautical miles. The Strait of Hormuz is 24 nautical miles, right? Where you have 3 ships being engaged. It's possible the Iranians didn't detect them, in time to really get off good shots, and just fired their packages, and the United States defended against them. All of this is speculative till we get it, but it's a classic freedom of navigation operation. I've done this. I can't remember how many times we did it off of Libya, did it off of Syria, did it off of Iran. It's exactly what we do, and we expected their response, and we responded to their response. Whether Mujtaba al-Khamenei thinks that this is a step towards war again, right? Epic Fury 2.0. It's really up to Tehran now.
I've got a bit more context for you. So the more details from the CBS report. From the Truxton and the Mason came under intense Iranian attack in what U.S. officials described as a fiercer and more sustained Iranian assault that the warship faced only a few days ago. So that's more than what they faced a few days ago.
Right.
U.S. officials said Iranian fast attack boats approached closely enough that destroyer opened fire using naval guns, close-in weapon systems, and deck-mounted weapons, while supporting aircraft and Apache helicopters engaged targets with Hellfire missiles and machine guns. Officials also said Iran launched drones and missiles during the confrontation, adding that there were no casualties or damage to the U.S. ships. And then you've got Jennifer Griffin from Fox News confirms, I can confirm from senior U.S. officials that the U.S. military also just struck Iran's Bandar Kargan naval checkpoint in Minab. Yeah. So that's from Fox News.
Right.
And then so this is kind of the additional context. And one summary here came in. trying to look at this situation. They said 2 days ago, 48 hours ago, Fujairah was attacked, but Iran denied responsibility. 24 hours ago, Saudi and Kuwait cut U.S. access rights to their air bases, accusing Trump of downplaying the attack on Fujairah. The Trump administration, angered over Riyadh's decision, ends Project Freedom in response. Earlier today, the U.S. attacked an Iranian tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Less than 6 hours ago, Saudi and Kuwait restored U.S. access rights to their bases. Within the past 2 hours, the U.S. attacked Bandar Abbas, Qasem Island, and Minab, with Fox claiming the strikes were in response to the Iranian attack on Fujairah. In response, Iran launched retaliatory attacks on U.S. vessels in the Persian Gulf off the coast of the UAE.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a summary.
All of it tracks except for that part about this is a response to Fujairah. This is a response to the Freedom of Navigation operation. I have to tell you something. I've been engaged with Iranian small craft at close quarters. I think there's confusion in what the reporters are saying. 5-inch gun, yes, but that they allowed Iranian craft within 5-inch gun range is a little weird. Either they didn't detect them or it's a little strange. We would have used helicopters further out. Also, Sea Whiz, the close-in weapon system, that's for missiles. If small craft are close enough for you to use the Sea Whiz, you are having a little bit of naval malpractice there, right? And the 25 millimeter chain gun. That means you let them get close. No one wants to let them get close in the Strait of Hormuz. They could have sunk them 5-10 miles off with aircraft or helicopters. So we'll see as the story comes together whether it clarifies that. I've chased bog hammers. We used to call it bowling for bog hammers. I've been within 3 nautical miles of bog hammers, and we didn't engage with deck guns until we got into a missile duel with an Iranian ship and quickly sank it. Then the bog hammers went off. So apparently there was clearly an Iranian squadron of small craft just sitting there like a raft or moving around at night, because it's 5 in the afternoon. This occurred at 4 in the afternoon. This is our usual attack time, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. We like to fight at this point because we have thermal images. But we're going to find out exactly how these craft got close enough, or if they were actually close enough. They could use the 5-inch guns on cruise missiles, drones, a bunch of other things. So I think we're going to need a lot more clarity before we can get the true story of what actually happened there. We shoot at Ghost too. We shoot a lot at Ghost. But in this particular instance, it was a freedom of navigation operation that provoked this, and we struck back.
Last question is, how likely is this to escalate?
Pretty likely. The question is, are we going back to the war, or will Mujtaba al-Khamenei, when he's getting these reports, go, "Halas, no problem. Let Mosaic SOH handle the issue according to the operational plan. Let's increase the number of ballistic missiles. Let's see." Hard to hit a ship with ballistic missiles, even though Iran has capability to do that. But a large attack to me is not, 10 drones. A large attack to me is 100. That way you're going to definitely get hits. Drones, cruise missiles. By tomorrow, they will have that in place. So if Trump
if you see an attack like this, that means we want to escalate. It does not mean like we're going through the escalation ladder. That's not falling into the escalation trap. That's setting the escalation trap.
Oh yeah, you're setting the escalation trap. And here's another thing. I keep saying this all the time. When you start a fight or get in a fight in the SOH, the Strait of Hormuz, insurance companies are sitting back like me, having a cup of tea going, we're not going to insure anybody. It's now 100% UK MTO, critical, hot. Nobody's going through the Strait of Hormuz. So call the Chandlers, get more food brought out to your ship, prepare to do more deck painting, because no one's going to insure a vessel now that's going out where real fighting in the SOH is going on.
Malcolm, appreciate you coming on. Perfect timing as well. You came on literally as the escalations were starting, so you timed it right.
All right. Well, let's see what happens tomorrow.
Thanks, Malcolm.
All right. Take care.
Stefano, how are you, man?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, good, man. Good. Now we've got more clarity on what's going on. It was unfolding while we were speaking earlier. What do you make of everything we're seeing?
Well, I mean, I think, I don't, I'm trying to remember. Did we record yesterday or the day before? It's kind of hard to.
I forgot as well. Yeah.
I think that's 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. And the conversation was, okay, well, what does it mean? Look, I think U.S. Central Command right now, what they released is this was a response to an Iranian attack. I believe the Iranians are claiming that the U.S. conducted an attack or a boarding or something against Iranian vessels who were probably avoiding the blockade. And so this was kind of a tit for tat that then kind of escalated and accepted a strike package. It's very interesting how the Iranians are claiming that this wasn't a U.S. only operation, right? If you look at Iranian media, they're framing it like they haven't named a country yet. They're saying, well, they received supports from the Gulf. Some other accounts associated with Iran and some media associated with Iran are kind of more pointedly directing against the UAE. And again, it kind of goes back to, okay, well, maybe this is something where.
But they haven't attacked the UAE though. That was a bizarre thing. They were hinting that could be the UAE, but the UAE was not attacked.
Correct. Now, again, it's still early in the day, right? Well, it's still in the middle of the night, right? So we'll have to wait and then, if I may, Mario, one of the, I think criticisms that we might have with the mainstream media is this kind of like this 24 news cycle, this ability to provide analysis and all that, and try to respond immediately. If I would say, if anything, on X, it's probably even worse because I think a lot of times. It's like this, you're trying to do analysis immediately without the full picture, without an understanding, right? And I think, unfortunately, like when the Straits of Hormuz, like with Project Freedom, right, Trump suspended it, everybody was focusing, did he taco? And what it really looked like it happened, no, the Saudis said, no, you're not using our airspace anymore, right? That looks like it was the main issue. Maybe there was an opening from negotiations, but it looks like now that we know. Now, what was interesting before all this happened, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait gave authorizations for the U.S. to use their military bases for Project Freedom. And one of the sticking points, it looks like, is that the Saudis were actually furious with that morning press briefing from specifically General Kane's comment that you asked me in one of the lives we did about that threshold under the ceasefire, right? And how the U.S. was separating Project Freedom with the attacks on UAE, right? And that was the messaging from the U.S. They're trying to separate it. Apparently, Saudi Arabia basically said, well, if you're going to separate the two, then you're not going to use our military bases. Basically, Saudi Arabia is saying, no, they're one and the same. If we're going to enable you to do these military operations against Iran, you can't turn around and say when Iran attacks us, you're going to try to separate the two. You're going to have to respond. And
could it be also Saudi sticking? Could it be Saudi sticking up to the UAE as well?
Yeah, in a way, yes. The UAE is leveraging Saudi Arabia in a sense, which is very interesting because we know the tensions the UAE and Saudi Arabia have had for months now, if not longer, with Yemen, Sudan, and kind of that diplomatic rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Very interesting in this aspect. Saudi Arabia is kind of acting as that protector of the Gulf and saying, well, if you're not going to do this, we're not going to enable it. What I'm looking for, Mario, is did the UAE participate in these strikes? I'm not yet convinced it was a U.S. only, right? We do have reporting and confirmation at this point, both from Fox News, I believe, and then we had other news organizations such as the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, already confirmed it, and U.S. Central Command released a statement right before we went live stating the U.S. did these strikes because they attacked 3 U.S. destroyers. I think a lot of the retaliations were a little bit more expansive because it might have served as a way for the United States to say, okay, now you attacked our warships before you attack the UAE. We're going to do this massive strike package in southern Iran to kind of combine both to try to reestablish deterrence. And if that's the case, I'm looking at, did the UAE participate in this, or was this an only U.S. only? That's why the original comment was Iran is kind of implying that the UAE had a hand in this. And again, I wouldn't be surprised.
That would be wild. But that would be wild. Like, why does the UAE need to get involved? Because they won't make much of a difference to the firepower. The US has enough fighter jets. So why drag themselves into the war even further?
They've already been dragged by Iran. And any time
but if the US is offering deterrence, you depend on US deterrence. Why get involved directly? You can't make a difference.
Well, you can. I mean, the UAE does have a military capability, but at the same time, I mean, you tell that to any country, so I'll just take a hit. No, I mean, at
Yeah.
some point, no leader is ever going to run with that, right? Like you're going to get hit. So you're
A
going to
White House official claimed there was never a restriction or a ban on U.S. bases, U.S. use of bases in Kuwait or Saudi, calling the report fake news.
I mean, yeah, they're going to say that, but I mean, there's
according to that's according to Caitlin from the New York Post. Are all the news outlets just part of the war right now and just mouthpieces? Everyone just fed whatever information the government wants out
what's
there?
very interesting, very interesting, right, with this administration, with Trump specifically. I mean, if you're a reporter, you have his number, you can call him and interview him, and if you get lucky, he answers, and you have an interview right there. I mean, if anything, like that's the irony, right? He's literally the most accessible president in U.S. history that any reporter could call him. And it kind of feeds into that. And journalists want to take advantage because they want that scoop. They want that reporting. They want to push it out there and they get the commentaries from the president. But I mean, that's just how the nature of the business, right? Both from the U.S., the West, and Iran, they try to find areas where they can use from information warfare and to push their own mouthpiece. But the White House official can deny the reporting from the Wall Street Journal. No, I'm sorry, it was NBC News. NBC News was the one who reported on Saudi Arabia, denying that. And then Wall Street Journal said Saudi Arabia and Kuwait reinstated that authority. And I think there were some negotiations in the background. The White House can deny it, but it actually kind of makes sense why then the U.S. suspended Project Freedom, because they were concerned that they didn't have the assets in place. Maybe there was an opportunity for negotiations where we did see those negotiations kind of move forward. A lot of the officials kind of came out and said it looks promising. President Trump himself said, hey, I'm very optimistic. I believe actually it was an interview, I believe, to the New York Post, where he said, I'm very optimistic about these negotiations, but then he put an important caveat where he said, but I've had this feeling before to basically no fruition, right? So I think the U.S. leveraged this, but they had negotiations in the backgrounds. They're trying to see the situation, how it evolved with the negotiations. Now the question is, does Project Freedom restart because of these strikes that happened? And I think that's it. And then more importantly, did the UAE participate? And lastly, what I would say is we don't know where this is going to kind of lead to the negotiations. Today, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, I guess, got leaked the demands, the U.S. demands for the nuclear enrichment perspective and the Iranian nuclear program, these hard lines the U.S. released. And then Iran kind of came back and said, these are, too maximalistas. We're not going to accept it. The negotiations were going one way or another, and then we had these strikes. So everything's in flux right now, Mario. And very hard
the U.S.
Yeah.
Israeli Army radio is saying U.S. destroyers have withdrawn from the Strait of Hormuz after returning fire on Iranian targets. So did these destroyers? So was it a freedom of navigation?
They went in apparently to target, and what the Iranians are claiming, they went in, they hit Iranian vessels, and then they were kind of going back and forth.
But why did that? But did that really happen much in the war? Like you didn't have warships get that close to the Iranian coast, did you?
No.
Exactly. Why this time? Exactly. Why this time? Why are they getting so close to the coast?
Because the Project Freedom and the reopening of the Straits of Hormuz and the enforcement of the naval blockade.
Yeah, but they're not open. But they're not doing it right now. So why in this attack did the U.S. destroyers go into the Strait of Hormuz? Is that a freedom of navigation move?
It could have. I mean, we don't know, right? That's operational planning. We're not going to have access to that. That's very inside knowledge, and it's going to be classified. So we're not necessarily going to know. It could be speculation. They could have been because they were trying to enforce a specific aspect of the blockade. Maybe they wanted to do a freedom of navigation. Maybe they were protecting vessels that were going through that. Maybe Trump saying we suspended Project Freedom was actually a ruse, and that still has been going on. And it was just more of a ruse, and maybe the strike against these naval vessels was Iran's response to the U.S. really not suspending Project Freedom. So they said, well, we have to attack these warships, because they are doing Project Freedom. So maybe the story is because that's an excellent question. Like, what were these vessels doing here if Project Freedom was suspended? So if they were doing a freedom of navigation mission, well, then that means Project Freedom never ended. So that's an important thing. So, and we're speculating right now, trying to figure out. But what we do know is the vessels were there, and the Iranians felt compelled that they had to respond, either because the U.S. Navy, as they claimed, attacked Iranian vessels, merchant vessels, or the Iranians perceived them doing Project Freedom, challenging Iran's closure of the Straits of Hormuz, and they felt compelled to respond. And now the U.S. conducted significant response in retaliation for that.
CBS is now reporting that Iranian attack boats approached so closely to the U.S. ships that they were forced to open fire from their deck weaponry to repel them. How the hell did the attack boats get so close to the U.S. warship?
I mean, again, we don't know the rules of engagement. Number one. Number two, I mean, anybody who sailed through the Straits of Hormuz or through the Gulf of Aden during the height of piracy, I mean, these vessels can get very close, right? We don't know what the rules of engagements are specific in this construct of ceasefire. If they got close and there was warnings they were trying to do that, maybe the U.S. naval warships wanted to do everything to prevent a military escalation, so they waited until the last possible second to respond, and then they were forced to respond to target these small boats. So, I mean, those small boats, I mean, those fast boats are kind of suicidal, if you want my honest opinion. Like, you're going to go after a naval destroyer with these small boats. It's not, that's not what was the thought process there for doing that. And at some point, the U.S. Navy is going to challenge you over Channel 16, which is the Maritime International Radio Station channel, where all mariners' initial conversations, either to initiate contacts or to issue SOS and stuff like that. The U.S. naval warships probably sent multiple warnings before opening fire. So the question is, why did the Iranian fast boats felt compelled to get so close to the U.S. naval warships, and what was their?
What do you think triggered? What do you think triggered all this? What was is it retaliation for the attack on the UAE, as Fox News initially reported? Is it them targeting a cargo ship, like what Iran said? Iran said they attacked a cargo ship. Iran fired back, and then they struck Iran.
Right. So I mean, that's the thing, right? So what U.S. CENTCOM's article said, this was a self-defense, and then they did the strike package as a response to the attack. Fox News reported it was in retaliation for UAE. I think it was both. I think basically they took this opportunity that this happened, and then they did a retaliation. Again, I'm waiting to see if UAE did also join the U.S. in these strikes. And they just did they basically conducted these, two birds, one stone, right? Retaliation for the UAE, self-defense measures for the attacks against these naval warships, and then you do that. The question I have is, why did the Iranians do it? We don't know if it's what they say is because the United States attacked some sort of, they were trying to enforce the naval blockade. We've seen the U.S. use lethal force to enforce the naval blockade. So did Iran retaliate? Was this a freedom of navigation operation, Project Freedom, something like that? But I think the U.S., I think it's to answer your question directly, I think they took an advantage to retaliate for UAE, and they took the opportunity for this attack as a basically leverage for them doing that. Would you expect
Iran to attack the UAE again after this, or do you think that could establish deterrence?
The last time they did,
but the last time there was no deterrence. Maybe the last time they were testing what if the US will even respond. Now that the US responded, maybe they've established deterrence.
I mean, I guess that's a key question, right? And then that's where I think the next 24 hours is going to be key, right? Does Iran retaliate to this attack? Because it's much more significant than the original one of the 6 vessels that were destroyed. Right? Yeah,
there were reports by CBS. This attack against the US was significantly more than what we saw 2 days ago.
Correct. So now the question is, how does Iran respond? And if they respond against UAE, because as they said in their public statements, they're accusing the UAE as being responsible for these operations. So I think what I would suspect, I mean, remember when I said, okay, the restart of war was at a 30%, right? The messaging from the U.S. government right now is the ceasefire is still in effect, that these military strikes are not designed to get rid of the ceasefire. Right now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with the cabinet to go over all this, right? So we know the Israelis are having these conversations and preparing. So that question, I think, now is, do we see a restart of the war? I mean, I think from a 30%, I think right now we should increase that to a 40%. Again, low confidence, as we've been talked about. The question then becomes, how does Iran respond in the next 24 hours? Do they attack UAE? Do they attack other countries in the Gulf? Or more importantly, do they conduct attacks against U.S. military bases in the region, such as Prince Sultan Air Base or U.S. military stations around? Those are the things I'm looking for, because that can restart major combat operations.
Yeah, there's no reports. I'm seeing if there's any reports about attacks on the UAE because there's difference in this attack. And it seems the explosions heard in the UAE were attacks on U.S. warships off the coastline of the Emirati coastline. Does it mean anything that those warships were just very close to the Emirati coastline, that so close that the explosions were heard in the UAE?
No, I'm not necessarily surprised. I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised. So these are the type of things that they're doing. These are the type of things that they will be where the U.S. naval vessels will be operating out of, and it's not that large of a distance that you wouldn't be able to hear it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised by that. And then the question is, now that the U.S. conducted these strikes, how does Iran respond? And do we see a repeat of what we saw a couple of days ago, which I think is a likely response from Iran?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see the latest updates here on the situation as well. Do you think Israel was part of? Okay, a new explosion was just heard in Sirik County, southern Iran. What do you make? Yeah, what do you make of the targets that were struck as well?
I'm actually. This is from IDF military radio. And they said, quote, I mean, from the Israeli, as an Israeli assessment, says, quote, it is estimated that the exchange of blows between Iran and the United States has ended, and both sides have ceased their attacks.
Yes, yeah, that came in a few minutes ago.
Yeah. So that's what they're claiming. We'll see.
But now there's a report that was about 10 minutes ago, and then now there's a report explosions over Sirik, southwest Iran.
But right,
so we'll see
the
whether
question is, but it's like the explosions.
That could be interception of drones. Yeah, it could be
and not even
just
an
training.
interception of drones. It could just be that a lot of the air defense, just like what we saw in Tehran, they're probably at a very heightened alert, and anything they see panics them.
Yeah,
and so they're going to respond to it, right? So those are the things. So we'll see how this goes. I think the next one, again, it could be just this latest round has ended. The U.S. obviously did their strikes, pulled out. Everything, and from the U.S. perspective is done. The question, though, becomes tomorrow, do we wake up to reports of strikes against UAE or Doha or something like that? Obviously, UAE is probably going to be in the focus, and that's the most likely area of any Iranian retaliation is what would be happening. But I think the next 24 to 48 hours will be key if we see some of those strikes. But to be honest, this might be just the new normal, Mario, right? Like if we're looking at this, where the negotiations are really advancing right now. And if, the question is, okay, if the next couple of weeks, it could be in a scenario where the negotiations continue in a very long time. The Straits of Hormuz are continuing to be closed. The U.S. naval blockade continues. Maybe the U.S. restarts Project Freedom. And then we have periods of military attacks between Iran, the U.S., and Iran against UAE and other Gulf countries. And this just becomes the normal thing. So it's kind of like, it goes lower than what we saw in February and March when really the war started, and we saw these, thousands of strikes and missiles flying everywhere, drones. But what we see now in this week, this becomes now the new normal in this conflict, right? So, not a frozen conflict, but a very tenuous peace where you do have occasional fighting between both sides. Just less than what we saw in the major war.
That's a crazy. If that becomes the new norm, that'll be freaking horrible for the Gulf. That depend on that feeling of safety and security if that becomes the new norm. The spokesperson for Iran's Qatem al-Anbiya central headquarters, that was a bit ago, he did say, so I want to read out his whole statement because I want to talk about the statement of coordination with regional countries. He says, headquarters has accused the US of violating the ceasefire by attacking an Iranian oil tanker near Jasik and another vessel off the coast of Fujairah, while simultaneously conducting airstrikes on non-military areas in Bandar Kamir, Sirik, and Kashem Island, in coordination with some regional countries. So it's not country. I thought it was just countries. It says countries. And he talks in coordination. So in coordination doesn't mean that those countries were involved militarily. But two questions. First, when they say in coordination with, could it just be other countries allowing the US to use their base? Would that count?
I mean, yes. I think from the Iranian perspective, that's what they're going to use that as justification. But that was always the justification they used for striking them before the war, right? I mean, not before the war, during the war. So I think a lot of this is where the Iranians are they put countries, because a lot of them are providing that logistical support, that basing support. But more importantly, I wouldn't discount the possibility that the UAE directly participate in these strikes. Again, we don't know.
What about Israel as well? Is that a possibility?
No. I mean, the Iranians claimed that the Israelis were involved. Some
sources, some Iranians,
some Iranian media, but we have no indication. I don't think Israel participated at all in this. And generally, the areas where we saw these strikes happening are in areas where the Israeli Air Force didn't really operate, and that's more been the U.S. areas of operation. So,
but there were reports of fighter jets over Iraq. That would be Israelis, no?
No, it could be the U.S. That could be 100% be the U.S. Yeah, that could be 100% the U.S. because we have a lot. While this was happening, Iran is still conducting strikes against Iraqi Kurdistan groups. Like today, right before all this started.
Yeah, true.
Today, right, a couple hours ago. So a lot of those, and so any of those retaliations, those jet activities, the coalition and the U.S. specifically will continue to monitor that area and make sure that if the Iranians respond, they have assets in place to deal with it.
What do you make of the progress on the negotiations? So we had an American offer to Iran. Iran has apparently rejected that offer again. There's a meeting with Xi Jinping. Iran was with Xi Jinping. So, Iran's foreign minister was with Xi Jinping. Also, there's a report that the president has met Mustafa Khamenei in person. He said that he met with the supreme leader for nearly 2.5 hours to brief him on the regional situation, which is surprising considering the supreme leader would be in hiding. So be surprised if one of the officials would go and meet him in person. Also, in the meantime, a confidential CIA assessment concluded that Iran could withstand the U.S. naval blockade for roughly 3 to 4 months, according to CBS, Washington Post. 3 to 4 months, and that's a conservative estimate. And that 70% of their missile stockpiles and 75% of their missile launchers remain intact. That's a pretty shitty situation for the U.S. If that report is true, that Iran, according to WAPO, Iran could sustain this for 3 to 4 months, and that's being conservative, and they have 3/4 of their missiles and missile launchers available.
Right. So what I would say to that, and I said this in another interview, what I would say is like, okay, when we're analyzing intelligence reports that kind of get leaked to the press, one, we have to be cognizant of these things. One, what was the methodology that the CIA used, if this was a CIA report as reported by WAPO, as they claim it was? What was the methodology that they used to determine all these outcomes, right, and figures? Two, what's the confidence level of this intelligence report? Is it a low, medium, or high confidence report, right? We don't know that. We don't know the methodology that they used. We don't know the confidence level and how they did this. And three, more importantly, was this a CIA sole report? Did it had other authors, other intelligence community components that kind of also participated, or did the CIA just pull those intelligence and then use it for their own, or did they coordinate with other agencies to do this, right? And since we're lacking that, that's very key in how it's done.
No, but we've been getting a lot of reports about. We've got obviously the corridors that were open from Pakistan. We're also aware that Iran has started slowing their capacity, the oil wells, the extraction of the oil. They're using the cargo ships, some older cargo ships as well.
Economic collapse when the CIA, we don't get that from WAPO though. That's the problem. The CIA, if this was a CIA report, they would have defined what that meant, and maybe their definition for that is not. It's a much higher threshold than maybe a lot of us would have thought about, right? So, for example, their currency, the Iranian currency, the rial, is worthless and continues to lose value. Unemployment is skyrocketing. There's barely any economic output inside of Iran. Now, people aren't getting paid. Like, salaries have not been paid, even within the government. Military personnel haven't been paid. So the question then becomes, okay, obviously that's not economic collapse, but what would constitute economic collapse? Like, what does that mean? Because
I would assume IRGC running out of money to continue operations. I would call that collapse, because it doesn't talk about economic collapse. It talks about Iran withstanding their naval blockade. For me, withstanding would mean the IRGC maintaining operations, just maintaining control of the country, maintaining operations of the country, and maintaining their military machine.
Right. Again, But we do know that significant portions of the IRGC haven't been paid.
According to who?
So we've seen that report, I believe, we got that report. I mean, I would have to go back. I think it was like, if I'm not mistaken, the Wall Street Journal, don't quote me on this. The Wall Street Journal, Iran International, I know for a fact has really been reporting that. You can say, but it's still,
we use them a lot. We in our posts, we keep using them, but they've just been wrong so many times that I still use them, but I'm treating them like I treat Channel 12 almost.
I mean, okay. I mean, I got that. I would just be very cognizant
or the Palestinian network, the Hamas network that I used to. That was Al-Quds News.
Yeah, Al-Quds News. But again, like that's fine. We could be very dismissive, but like I'm pretty sure like the Wall Street Journal was one of them that also reported, if not even.
Yeah, but if you're looking at the actions of the Iranians, like just look at their actions. If they are in that position where they're not able to pay soldiers, you'd expect some concessions or some restraint out of fear of going back into war, or just to kind of cause the suffering.
Again, this is one of the things, Mario, that it is. What you're trying to figure. Okay, here's the problem. What are we trying to get at? All this analysis is trying to get at one thing.
Iran has the upper hand right now.
The will to fight.
Yeah.
That is what we're trying to figure out. Does Iran have the will to fight? And the problem is that is the hardest thing to assess. It is one of the hardest things to figure out how it's going to be assessed. How do we know this? For example, let's look at Syria with Bashar al-Assad. It took 1 week from when the Syrians launched their offensive in December 2024 for Bashar al-Assad to flee and end a war that lasted over a decade. And in 1 week, the will to fight of the Assad army vanished, collapsed, disappeared. Something that hadn't happened years ago. But then when you look at it and you look at the data, you're like, oh, you can start seeing the trend lines that indicate, okay, this could happen. We could run into a situation where the Assad army is going to have a collapse because they give up on the will to fight. But what was the trigger?
True. I agree with that. And I've had discussions with people that were part of that collapse as well. They refused to be part of interviews, but hopefully one day they'll accept. And it was an astonishing series of events that happened that day or that week. But we can only make analysis on the information we have right now. Right now, Trump decides Operation Freedom. Trump stops Operation Freedom. Trump always talking about how there's almost a deal. Iran saying no, there is no deal. Politico put out a report that Trump really wants to get out of this. Not sure if you saw it today. Trump really wants to get out of this, but the Iranis are not letting him save face, and he doesn't know to allow them to save face. And then you look at the actions of the Iranians. It's not the actions of a country I would expect them to be.
But then you look at the Wall Street Journal
on the verge of capitulating.
Right. But then you look at the Wall Street Journal editorial report and the demands that the U.S. that they said it's the red lines of the U.S. is the Iranians are never going to accept that. Right. The negotiations that the United States have imposed on Iran, what the U.S. said is their red lines, that was published by the Wall Street Journal editorial, are they're maximalist demands from the American perspective on the nuclear program of Iran.
Yeah, but that's so. Whenever I see these demands, whenever we see demands from each country in the media, I always take those with a grain of salt. I think behind the scenes, there's other reports that the Americans are a lot more flexible. We know that the proxy network has been, as far as I'm aware, it's not even being discussed, not even on the table anymore. And the ballistic missile program, which were both non-negotiable, are not even on the table anymore. The only things that are being disagreed on now are the nuclear program and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Those aspects that, from our understanding, is if you look at the broad base of the agreements that's being done. So right now, there's a 30 from the New York Times and others. That is. Do we accept they reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. stops its naval blockade to then enable time for negotiations, first on the nuclear program and then on the broader aspect of Middle Eastern security, right? Those kind of the three broad frames.
I think, the other way around. I think the short term is, sorry. Multi-phase deal.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
And then you have
So
the nuclear
multi-phase, just
program,
for the
yeah.
audience, a multi-phase deal. So phase one is to get an agreement on the that's the recent, that's in the last 48 hours or 24. Phase one is, and that was what Iran proposed, by the way, a couple of weeks ago. And US said no, if you remember. Iran said, hey, let's discuss the Strait of Hormuz now, which we will control, by the way. And then we discuss the nuclear program later. The US, and I expected them to do that. No way, we need it. Trump needs a win now. And now the US came back, says, actually, we're considering
but
a multi-phase
idea
deal.
the idea is, right, so the US said no. So the idea was, but that's where I think the negotiations are happening, is because the United States wants solid commitments from Iran from the nuclear agreement, so then they can enter negotiations on that. And that's why we don't have an agreement, because the Iranians are not willing to give that, and the US is demanding. The question is, can this last like that for a week, 2 weeks? The only thing that it goes back to, I think, this is what I go back at the beginning of this, that we're all trying to analyze something in the immediate after effect of what is going on. We don't know the broad-based implications of these strikes that the U.S. did. Obviously, we don't know, right? And so this can be a very major catalyst and change of what's going on. The Project Freedom can now, because of this, President Trump might say, okay, we are reinstituting Project Freedom. I would be looking right now at his True Social to see if he makes a statement to say, what does this mean? That's just how that's how the Trump administration works. If you had his number, Mario, and you called him and he answers, you get an interview with him. So get his number. Go for it.
So, but there is one pattern though. I remember in the early days of the war, 80% of their missile launchers and missiles are destroyed in the early days of the war.
No, it was not that it was destroyed. It dropped. And let me go to your second point of the 70 to 75%. Again, assuming from this report, we don't know the
that was, by the way, that number was 50% at the end of the war by Israeli media and US media. I think Washington Post again, Wall Street Journal, it was 50%. And before that was obviously a lot less. So it was a bit like 20, 30% that was, still functional, most of it destroyed. Then actually, no, half of it is still functional, and now 3/4 of it is functional.
I got to go to, because all the reporting that I've kind of seen, at least since the end of because the WAPO article is not the only one that has mentioned those numbers, right? We've seen similar numbers from other American media indicating 70 to 75% of the Iranian ballistic missile and their launchers are still available. And then the other aspect, I think the drone program was, I think, like 50% was still available for the Iranians, right? So a significant portion. So, but going back to the drop and all that, right? And when the United States did the strikes, obviously what they were prioritizing was the Iranians use underground facilities heavily for their ballistic missile program, heavily for logistics, storage, command and control, you name it. It's a heavily utilized. So what clearly the U.S. was prioritizing during the war was destroying at least the ability of the Iranians to access it, right? At least to stop those, right? They would shut down the entrances, specifically prevent the Iranians from being able to grab the missiles while the war was happening. And I think the question that we should be asking ourselves is not how many ballistic missiles they have right now. I would be interested if we have estimates, and that would be how many of those ballistic missiles was Iran unable to access because they were shut down, the entrances were destroyed, these storage facilities were inaccessible. And so now how many of those ballistic missiles were basically under rubble that the Iranians then had to dig out during the ceasefire to re-access it? That's number one. But number two, the question is also, first of all, in a 5-week period, a destruction of 30 to 35% of a ballistic missile program is a pretty solid number, right? From a 5-week period. It's not the success that they're saying is completely destroyed. That's a talking point from this White House that obviously anybody can look at numbers and say, well, no, they still have 70%. That's still a significant threat. And obviously you should push away. Still 30% is significant. But here's the question we need to be asking. And I think this article didn't release it. And I think it would be I would hope they did. The question is how much production capabilities they have remaining. Because if you look at the report and how in the WAPO report, they said they were able to repair ballistic missiles that might have been damaged from these underground facilities. Because clearly the United States' goal was just, you cannot access these ballistic missiles. We're destroying the entrance, and then we're moving on to a next target because they have all these other targets they want to do. It wasn't to destroy all the missiles in these storage facilities. It was now that they can access it, they can move on. But the report, WAPO said they could repair it, and then they basically were able to rebuild missiles that were like almost built, right? Just finalize the end production line. What they never said and what they didn't highlight is what's the production capability of Iran's ballistic missile? Because then this is the problem that Iran has. If the United States and Israel destroyed Iran's ability to produce ballistic missiles, that 70%, assuming the 70% is correct, and for arguments, let's say it is, it might be, and they say it's conservative, it could also be optimistic because we don't have access to the report. But let's even say 70% of their ballistic missile is still intact. If the US and Israel destroyed their production capabilities, that's it. It's not easy for Iran or any country to build manufacturing capabilities specifically for ballistic missiles in a short time.
But there's the counter argument would be also I've got also, so I'm just looking at some influencers, some UAE influencers just posting some stuff, not worth reading out. But also the counter argument will be there's a lot of reports that their production capabilities are still not intact, but they're still there and they're still able to produce them because they're also underground. And there's reports that you've got the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile that was moved to the region, and there's reports that was moved to be able to strike.
Bloomberg report, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like I'm like.
So there's a report. Trump tells me in a phone call. You know how he said someone will call Trump and get an answer. So someone called Trump. Trump tells me in a phone call the retaliatory strikes against Iranian targets are just a quote love tap. It's just a love tap. When asked if it means the ceasefire is over, no, the ceasefire is going. It's in effect. So that's Trump making it clear that for him, the war has not restarted. The ceasefire stands.
That's the thing. So going back to the,
but for him to call it a love tap, it's a clear retaliation for the strikes on the UAE. I think that's pretty clear in my opinion.
And I think, and so now the question is, does Project Freedom get announced that it started again? And does Trump then say the way of him say? Now he says, "Oh, we've hit an impasse because the Iranians, one, aren't negotiating in good faith, or we're not able to do anything in good faith." And then two, the other one would be, because of the strikes, do we announce Project Freedom resumes? Now that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait gave access again to the United States for these operations of access to the base. But going back to the production line, right? Again, we don't know the Iranian production capability. Regardless, even if some of these facilities, and also a lot of these were not necessarily underground. Like it's not. Like one thing is storing ballistic missiles. Let's make something very clear. One thing is storing ballistic missiles. Another thing is building ballistic missiles. And even like underground facilities, not that easy. It's not like a simple thing. And it does look like the U.S. really prioritized destroying it. The question then becomes, how much does Iran production capability have? Because if it's been significantly degraded, then that's 70%, which again could be a very optimistic number. That's it for the foreseeable future. And so Iran has to be very cognizant in how they operate and how they leverage these systems, and understand that every time you use the ballistic missiles, your stockpile goes lower and lower and lower. One of the things that Mario would say is, like, when we saw the beginning of the war, the drops, the 90% drops, and that's what they were saying, was not necessarily because the ballistic missiles, all of them were destroyed or their launchers and all that was destroyed, which, again, if you want my honest opinion, I haven't seen the report, and if I did see that intelligence report, I wouldn't be talking about it. I would be very keen to see how they determine that and what's the confidence level. I think it's a higher level, not too much higher degradation, but I think the 70% is more optimistic for Iran. And when they say it could be conservative, it's basically let's give the worst case scenario for the U.S. in our analysis. I think it's higher, but going to the original of the war, when they talked about the 90% drop, it's like, how many ballistic missiles and drones were Iran able to launch against the countries? And I think the fact that the U.S. were able to destroy these storage facility entrances and basically put a lot of these missiles for a while under rubble had a huge impact on Iran's ability to then leverage the ballistic missiles for response.
Allegedly, because the other argument is they did not fire a lot of them preparing for a war of attrition. I don't know which one is true. I think both could be true.
Okay. So we're talking about military doctrine now at this point. Okay, if war of attrition in a situation where the United States and Israel at that time had air superiority over Iran, was bombing you 13,000 times. What war of attrition? What are you talking? Like people throw these things that make no sense from a military.
No, but
you want to do strikes to degrade and destroy your enemy's ability to respond. That is why you do it.
But also, no, there's also the counter argument to be able to degrade. So they know the missile stockpiles are low as well. And Iran is a massive country. So the counter argument is they can sustain these attacks for a prolonged period of time. And they've shown that they can, that Iran still functions and they're still pretty maximalist in their demands. The US is pulling out without achieving any of their objectives and doing the complete opposite. So Iran is a pretty large country, and their bet would be to keep firing and depleting American air defense systems. And if they deplete all their missiles and missile launchers, then they would not have the ability to deter any escalations from the US. So the US could have done a lot more. They could have struck civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, destroyed their, the Karg Island port and refine the pipelines there. So a way to deter that is to be able to maintain certain capabilities.
Yes. But you can sustain those capabilities at not at necessarily the 70. Let's say 70% is the right. So you're telling me that Iran was only launched 30%, or destroyed. They were only able to consistently launch on a daily basis outside of the first day between 30 to 50 ballistic missiles. And so if that's the argument, what was Iran hoping to achieve?
But they're not hoping to achieve. Can't you say? But no. But the answer is they've already achieved it. So the US has found that these constant attacks by Iran and all Iran needed to do. You're talking about war of attrition. All Iran needed to do was just keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. I know you got to go now, but keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, and they did that. So it is a war of attrition for them because they don't need to waste all their missiles. They don't need to cause a lot of damage. They've already struck the American.
But look at
they've already struck the American bases.
Now we have a situation. Well, hold on. We have a situation where the Straits of Hormuz, there's closed, and then there's the blockade, right? So that's the situation. How is Iran? If you're looking at this not from the ceasefire perspective, but prior to this, right, when they were launching the missiles and all this was going on and all that. Now, I think people are completely overestimating the aspect of our overutilization of this concern of what this is attritional warfare. It's like the Russia and Ukraine. Oh, well, Russia hasn't committed their entire military force. What are they waiting for? By that logic, then why doesn't the U.S. fight that way? Nobody's making the argument that when the U.S. conducted airstrikes inside of Iran and they were bombing Iran and using all their JDAMs and all their standoff missiles, nobody's making the argument, but there's different. But
the U.S. needs to end the war as soon as possible. So for them, their intention is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible, so cause as much damage to Iranians as possible, so the Iranians can see it. All they need to do is keep the Strait of Hormuz closed until the U.S. cannot sustain the attacks anymore because they can't sustain the economic impact. So the objectives are very different.
And Iran can sustain this. We have a report from the CIA that said got it. Who do you think in 3 months is going to be in a worse situation if the situation doesn't change from an economy perspective? The U.S. or Iran? Who's in a worse situation?
If it's apples and apples, Iran. But if it's relative to their ability to sustain it and their resilience, because Iran just wants to survive. For Iran, this is an existential war. For the U.S., it's barely a war of choice. It's a war that is extremely unnecessary. From the American side, they could have continued life as normal. Iran's fighting.
From a political. So I can understand that.
But I think the ability to sustain it. You're talking about which one will be.
They're not using ballistic missiles to close the Straits of Hormuz. they launch it, but that's not really. No,
they fired it today.
Right. So there's anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, but a lot of these other ballistic missiles like the Shahab 3s, the Fateh 110s, the Fateh 313, the Zalzals, the Zolfagars, the Shuras, the Khyber Shakan, the Karab, all these Iranian ballistic missiles that exist, the vast majority of them are not designed for maritime targets. They're designed for ground targets, right? That's why they do that. Again, the question when people
But it could be the ground one. The ground one could be also to close the Strait of Hormuz. So, for example, if there's Operation Freedom, it just happened that Operation, whatever you call it, Freedom, I think, they would strike ground targets in the UAE as retaliation for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So it could still be for the Strait of Hormuz.
When you're looking at this, if I'm like an Iranian ballistic missile commander, and we're going back to this in the conversation of the war, this idea that Iran did this by design I think it's an argument that just doesn't make any sense in the long term, because you can maintain a deterrent with still, let's say, 30-40% of your ballistic missile force. If anything, if you're going to try to respond to the United States, because the United States is maximizing their air campaign against you, right? Your goal from the Iranian perspective, I would agree with you. You need the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. You need to impact a lot of pain and suffering on the Gulf countries because you're hoping to rip them away or pressure the U.S. to stop that. I get that argument, but you also want to degrade the U.S. military's ability to respond and to be able to maximize combat power, right? You don't do that by launching 10 ballistic missiles against a U.S. military base every day.
They've achieved,
you need more.
But just so they need to do three things to achieve that. Number one, degrade America's capabilities. And if you look at the report from CNN, they have done that. A lot of the radars have been destroyed. The destruction is a lot more than expected. So they've achieved that. The number two is pressuring the Gulf. They've done that. They don't need many missiles to be able to get the alerts going in Saudi and the UAE and Kuwait.
Wait. This CNN report about the U.S. bases and the 16 bases, right? How many of those bases did the U.S. evacuate before the war started?
I don't know.
A significant portion.
No, but that's not the goal. The goal is destroying the radars. The radars was probably the most sensitive and most important target the U.S. had then, the most expensive target, and the most difficult to replace.
Yeah. TP2s, so you had the THAAD radars and the Patriot radars. Some of them were damaged, but it didn't necessarily. So if you damage them, great. Okay, so let's make your argument true, right? First of all, the U.S. was still able to intercept, but you're hitting exactly my point. Your goal is let's destroy their air defense abilities to then do what? To then strike the air bases where the U.S. is utilizing to bomb your country. That, like the E3 that was destroyed, you want to do that every single day from an
unless so the point there is unless maybe they don't have that capability, so maybe they don't have enough missile launchers to all fire them at once, and maybe there's a rate, so whenever they fire they use four missile launchers every 20. Yeah, but I'm saying it doesn't have it. No, it's still in a way so it's a bit of a balance. So it doesn't have to be an extreme. We have the capability to destroy everything, but we're preserving it because it's a war of attrition. I think that's one extreme. The other one is like all the capabilities have been degraded, because I remember the reports early on. Oh, Iran's ability to strike the Gulf will end soon. Even Trump made a statement. Oh, they're gone now. That the Gulf have to thank us now, because I think there was one quiet day. It was early in the war, and Trump was like, "Oh, the Gulf needs to thank us because now Iran's capabilities have been destroyed." The day after, they started striking again. So I think it's somewhere in the middle where it is a choice and strategy, and the other one is capability degraded. So somewhere in the middle.
So that's the point, right? And that's what I was trying to get at. From this attritional perspective, yes, from a point of view that you want to, especially if the concern is about the production capability. That's the thing that I was trying to get at, right? Because the end of the day, what the problem we have to run into from an Iranian perspective, right, and trying to analyze this right now and how everything is going on, I think people are rushing to try to do an end conclusion and throwing out things that just from a military perspective doesn't make any sense. If you destroy the radars, your next goal then is to destroy the air bases and the assets that the U.S. has there that is being used to bomb your country, like the E3. Right.
That's the end outcome, yeah. But I think if their strategy would be, and by the way, I know you have to go, so just jump off on because you have to pick up someone. Yeah. But the radars, so you just damage the radars, don't destroy completely, damage the radars.
No, you want to destroy
keep the pressure if they can. I'm saying if there's the capabilities there, they can either destroy them all, because if they go all in on destroying the radars, they might degrade their capability to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. So the goal is to keep the pressure on the Gulf, damage the American bases, keep the pressure on Israel, because you got to convince them to end the war as well with the cluster munitions, and keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. So it's like and while depleting American munition stockpiles, which have been depleted. So and they've kind of achieved that in a way. Maybe I'm misreading everything, and I could be wrong, obviously. But from the outside, the munition stockpiles are depleted. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The Gulf is suffering and pissed off. Israel took a fair bit of damage, but less than the 12-day war. And American bases took more damage than expected. So in a way, maybe it was strategic. There is a possibility.
Well, I'm going to be honest. Like the damage to the U.S. military bases in a lot of aspects, like it's a lot less than I thought. Was going to be like
everyone. You're the first person, but you're the first person that says that to me.
That's fine. And I've interviewed.
I've had generals and admirals as well that are very hawkish.
Let me tell you. So my background, Mario, just to make sure for everybody here, is I worked as what you call an Op4 planner. I was an opposing force planner that specialized in enemy countries' ballistic missile programs and how they would use it in war. And I had a special emphasis in my previous job before my current one now with Artorias in Iranian ballistic missiles. right? Like,
Actually,
and then the specific one was the Al Gadir
Mate,
missile command.
then you make it hard for me to debate you, by the way.
So
then.
that's why when
If you-
people say, "Oh no," like, and I think this, I was literally having this conversation with a great account that focused on military matters from the U.S., and it's like people forget because of GWAT of like war. Like, let me make something abundantly clear: Saddam Hussein destroyed more U.S. jets during the '91 Gulf War than Iran did. Number one. Let's make that clear. Saddam Hussein shot down more American jets.
How many did he shoot down?
Over 50. It's like 50. And if I think with the coalition, with friendly fire and everything, I think the total was 70. And with the U.S., like 3 dozen, I think 30 to 40 or 50 like that. I'd have to go back to the numbers, right?
American fighter jets in that war.
And one of the things that he shot down, by the way, was an AC-130 gunship that I think killed 11 airmen. It's like a C-130 gunship, for those who play. He shot down a gunship that killed 11 airmen during the '91 Gulf War. He launched a ballistic missile that hit a barracks in Saudi Arabia that killed almost 30 American service members in the '91 Gulf War. Right, 30 Americans died in that.
What about fighter jets destroying in Iraq in 2003? It's only one, no?
Well, yeah, but because at that point, after '91, and then a decade after of just constant military campaign, sanctions, and everything, by the time 2003 rolled around, Saddam Hussein didn't have an effective air defense asset. '91, he had a very effective air defense asset, right? I would even make the argument that Iran's air defense was more powerful than Saddam Hussein's, but the U.S. had just did a better job during the Iran war. So that's number one. Number two, all those bases along the coast from Kuwait down the Persian Gulf, right? There's a reason why we got a lot of the reporting that they were being evacuated. Because Iran obviously has more ballistic missiles and more drones than we have interceptors. Now that we had air defense assets there still, but we pulled out of those bases. We're like, yeah, they're going to get bombed. Yes, they're going to get bombed. Like, that's just a matter of fact. That's why we pulled out. Because we don't care about equipment. We don't care about bases. We care about personnel. So you pull them out, and then you fight from other areas, right?
We care about bases, but $1 billion radars.
But not as much. You can
pretty
repair
important.
it. You can repair it. You don't think the U.S. can go right now? And of course they can. They went back to Al Dhafra, by the way. We saw the videos right now. There's tankers in Al Dhafra, back in Al Dhafra right now, flying from there. Al Dhafra Air Base got bombed by Iran multiple times through this war. Did it stop the U.S. abilities to now operate? They were pulled out before the war, and now we're back there. Like, that's the thing about this article that makes no sense. Oh, the damage was worse. Okay, you don't think we can repair it, and you don't think we suspected that? Of course we did. I knew this, and I was a low-level dude doing this. So it's like, again, it goes back to this idea that people forgot what war looks like. So for Russia, Ukraine, like, nobody learned from that. October 7th, nobody learned from that. This is the reality. This is what it is. And so when you're talking about the damage that is going on, yes, it's significant. Do not get me wrong. But do not say it was unexpected, because as somebody who studied the Al Gadir Missile Command and who replicate that in military exercises, that is literally what we planned on doing. And I can assure you, imagine a scenario where we didn't have the U.S. do a massive buildup, that this just happened overnight. So again, a lot of people can say this. The U.S. military planned for this. They executed that plan. They were doing it. The way the Iranians responded, to me, just did not make that much sense from it, because this argument are traditional. There were constraints, and then those constraints then compounded. It's like, okay, we need to, I can agree, especially with the production side being destroyed, they have to extend those capabilities. But generally, you would think you would want to degrade the U.S. ability to fight. And again, the destruction of those U.S. bases, look at Al Dhafra right now. The U.S. is operating out of Al Dhafra Air Base in UAE today. So clearly the damage that the U.S. bases suffered did not make them inoperable. They did not make Camp Buehring inoperable. They did not make Camp Arif inoperable. None of those air bases are inoperable. You can still operate in those facilities. We don't know what specific assets. Some of them, yes, the radars, fuel depots, we saw that. Great article. Great. A lot of those can be repaired, especially, and this is how you know, the U.S. is also kind of going away from these massive fixed infrastructures, because we understand, like, okay, this is not the future, because we understand how China would fight. So in certain areas, you want to get away from that. But a lot of those capabilities can just be rebuilt. The question now becomes, does the U.S. decide to rebuild them? And maybe that's an area from Iran. Do they consolidate to other areas and do it? But again, I do have to drop it. I'll leave now. But look at Al Dhafra Air Base. The U.S. is operating there right now. And that base got absolutely pummeled during the war, but now we're using it. So that's where I'm just, I'm not trying to say, yay, war, no war, U.S. best, Iran sucks. Iran has great military capabilities, and they're still able to fight and do. And I agree with you. Now we're entering the political conversation. But I would be very cautious of assuming that Iran, with the Straits of Hormuz, with the naval blockade, is willing to endure this long term just because they say they're going to endure it. And number two, I would recommend, if you're the Trump administration, maybe the messaging aspect needs to be better. But the days today as the endpoint has to be said is violence can happen any moment, and that can dictate a lot of things.
Well, he did put out a post. I'm going to read it for the audience. I know you have to go, but he put out a Truth Social post. You can jump off whenever you're ready, Stefano, while I'll read this out to the audience. Take care, bro. 3 world-class, so that's Trump on Truth Social as Stefano was talking. 3 world-class American destroyers just transited very successfully out of the Strait of Hormuz under fire. There was no damage done to the 3 destroyers, but great damage done to the Iranian attackers. They were completely destroyed along with numerous small boats, which are being used to take the place of their fully decapitated navy. These boats went to the bottom of the sea quickly and efficiently. Missiles were shot at our destroyers and were easily knocked down. Likewise, drones came and were incinerated while in the air. They dropped ever so beautifully down to the ocean, very much like a butterfly dropping to its grave. A normal country would not have allowed these destroyers to pass, but Iran is not a normal country. A normal country would have allowed these destroyers to pass, but Iran is not a normal country. They are led by lunatics, and if they had the chance to use a nuclear weapon, they would do it without question. But they'll never have that opportunity, and just like we knocked them out again today, we'll knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they don't get their deal signed fast. Our 3 destroyers with their wonderful crews will now rejoin our naval blockade, which is truly a, quote, wall of steel, President Donald J. Trump. So that post came out from Donald J. Trump. And for anyone that just came in, I'll give you just a recap on what happened today before you go about your day, because things have quieted now since. So I was alerted, and I was doing lives already, and I was alerted to explosions in Iran and the initial reports where there was an attack on Iran and that the UAE was involved. And I think the claims that the UAE was involved, which I don't think could have, is because there were aircraft leaving the American base in the UAE. So that was the initial report, as we got reports of explosions all across Iran. And then we started hearing explosions in the UAE, and that was Iran retaliating by striking American warships in the Strait of Hormuz, which according to Fox News was CBS, was a pretty substantial attack against those warships. And the warships were going through the Strait of Hormuz. Now they've gone out. So we're trying to make sense of everything, and the Iranians made this following statement. The spokesperson for Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya central headquarters has accused the U.S. of violating the ceasefire by attacking an Iranian oil tanker near Jasik and another vessel off the coast of Fujairah, while simultaneously conducting airstrikes on non-military areas in Bandar Kamir, Sirik, and Qashm Island in coordination with some regional countries. That's a big point here. In coordination with some regional countries. Now, what does coordination mean? My bet, and a lot of people are saying Israel might have been involved, or the UAE. I think none of them were. I think it was just the US. And it was the retaliation for the attack on the UAE after Saudi and other Gulf countries pressured the US. That's my deduction out of all this. In response, I'll keep reading the statement. In response, Iranian armed forces struck US military vessels east of the Strait of Hormuz and south of Shabar port, inflicting significant damage, the spokesperson said. So then we have a U.S. official that confirmed that Qashm Port and Bandar Abbas, 2 very important ports in the UAE, were struck by the U.S. And we had Malcolm Nance earlier say these were probably stuck because of these fast attack boats that keep leaving those ports. Reuters was reporting about the U.S. warships being attacked in Emirati waters. The Israeli Prime Minister had a meeting with the Security Cabinet, but just to brief them. Just going through it to see what else there was. Yeah, so that was pretty much it, guys. So that what was this? What triggered the attack was most likely what looks like it is the UAE was attacked, and they wanted the US to respond. And we got a report that Saudi and Kuwait closed their airspace for the US. And then we got a report the reason they did that is because the US kind of drew a line between Operation Freedom of Movement or Operation Freedom, and the strikes on the Gulf. In other words, if Iran strikes the Gulf because of Operation Freedom, they're unrelated. Does not mean the US needs to respond. So when Trump made that statement, it seems Kuwait and Saudi, in solidarity with the UAE, so it's a good sign between the countries. I'm speculating here that it's in solidarity with the UAE, but they said, hey, we're not going to open our airspace unless you can guarantee you'll protect the Gulf if they're attacked. And it seems that Trump agreed, and he now retaliated for the attacks on the Gulf, and the UAE and Kuwait opened their airspace just before that. And that all happened after Iran refused the latest offer by the US in the negotiations. So essentially, there were negotiations ongoing. In the meantime, Gulf countries are pissed off the US did not respond to the attack on the UAE. So Kuwait and Saudi closed their airspace. The US said, all right, we'll retaliate for the UAE. Iran rejected the offer. So that gave more reasons for the US to retaliate. The US attacked 2 vessels in the region. Iranians said that. Multiple reports said that while bombing Iran. Iran responded by not attacking. It's very important, guys. They did not attack the UAE. They attacked the vessels, the American vessels on the Emirati coast. The fact that the UAE was not struck is significant. It might be struck tonight. I might wake up to an alarm. We'll see. But the fact that UAE was not struck is significant because, one, if the UAE was involved in this attack, they would have bombed the UAE, in my opinion. And number 2, the deterrence by the US seems to be working. The Iran retaliated by striking American vessels, did not retaliate by striking the UAE. So that strategy of deterrence might have worked. Yeah, we've talked about the assessment, the CIA assessment by Iran's capabilities being significantly more than initially thought. About 3/4 of their missiles and missile launchers are still intact or still operable. We've got Iran's president sat with the supreme leader for 2.5 hours. He met the supreme leader, which is surprising considering the fact he should be in hiding for security purposes. We also have China. We got a report that China was not abiding by US sanctions on Iran. Then Bloomberg put out a report now that their financial regulator has quietly instructed major banks to actually abide by the sanctions and halt loans to US sanctioned refiners and Iranian oil ties. So in other words, it seems they are reversing or partially reversing their stance of not abiding by US sanctions. I'm not sure what's happening behind the scenes. It's really hard to read what that means. Yeah, I think that's it. There's more updates. I'll brief you. There's more things that are more analytical, things that happened today in the last week. But I think we'll focus on these current events. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation today and all the interviews today. There's one interview. I'm not sure if you guys listened to it. It was a very heated one. I was not prepared for a debate, but you should check it out if you want to understand. I'm always extremely critical, and critical is a light word to use considering my sentiment towards Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and anyone that has the same mindset as them. But as you know, guys, my position is always to try to understand the other side and try to bring you guys, the voices from all sides on every discussion. So if we're talking about Iran, I get you the Iranian perspective, the American perspective, the Gulf perspective. We've had people from the Emirates, from Saudi, the Israeli perspective, obviously multiple times, and the global perspective to understand everyone's perspective on this. And I try really hard not to have an echo chamber. And today, finally, I had someone on the show, Yishai Fleischer. He's a very eloquent speaker, a very difficult person to have a discussion with because he's a really good debater. But I really enjoyed the conversation because he was someone that agrees with the mindset of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And as much as I disagree with it, I'm extremely curious to understand where they're coming from. You have to always understand, guys, like we're all human. I'm human. You're human as every listener. And, the Iranian regime is human. Fucking ISIS and Hamas are human. We're all human. As crazy it is to believe. So I'm always fascinated to understand how some humans can have certain beliefs and do certain things, like, the extreme cases, the Nazis and what they did. And other humans are on the complete opposite side, and they spend all their life, being pacifists and helping people. So that's something I'm always fascinated by. And discussions like Yishai today was one of those, is to understand the people in Israel that do believe in the expansion of their territory, don't believe in equal rights for Palestinian Israelis and Jewish Israelis, don't believe in a two-state solution, agree with the leveling of villages. Where is this coming from? Or what led them to have that mindset? So that was one of those discussions, and I hope to continue having them, to continue speaking with officials in Israel, officials in Iran, officials in Palestine, and bring you those voices on the show as I have for the last few years. All right, guys, I'm dead. It's 2:30 in the morning, 3 in the morning. I hope the alarms don't wake me with Iran strikes on the Gulf. And I'll be going through the comments in a bit, see what you guys think today, what you guys like, what you guys don't like. All right. Have a wonderful day and evening. Bye.